Good morning, everybody. I hope you all had a good evening last night and a good rest overnight. I know I did. So for better or worse, some parts of the APSA annual meeting program are done at the discretion of the leadership or the president. Some of those sessions are no-brainers, slam dunks, like moving the business meeting from 6 a.m. to noon. That just is the right thing to do. Sometimes, however, things come up, suggestions, thoughts come up that aren't such a slam dunk, and this session is one of those. It occurred to me as we were kind of putting the session together that every day, many times a day, most days to be honest with you, every day I talk to and I thank the entity that I think of as my God and thank them for the opportunity to take care of kids and do what I do. I postulated that there are a lot of people who are like that as well, who are in that same place, who do that same thing. And then it occurred to me, but we never share it. We never talk about it. We kind of just ignore that whole sense of community that is the spiritualism that we all share and believe in. And then as Mary, as she always does, spent a little more thoughtful time trying to massage that thought into a session, she came up with the concept of how much strength we all derive from our, whatever it is, religion or beliefs or God or whatever, and that there was real value in sharing that as an experience as a group. So thank you all for coming this morning. I know this it's super hard, especially the auctioneer is still ringing in my ears. I'm not quite sure what that is. But thank you all for coming out this morning. I think it's really important. And it is, well, I think it's important because it's an important part of my life, so I'm glad that you all are part of it.
All right, well, good morning and welcome. So in thinking about this, you know, we have such a spectrum, all of us, from having a faith tradition that we grew up in, having a faith tradition perhaps that we grew up in that injured us very significantly, that we left, having no defined faith, but all of us, you cannot do the job we do and not be aware of the connection of human beings and the connection to something that's bigger than us. And so this whole idea, and what we're going to talk about today, and when I say we, it's we, because despite the fact that we did these linear things and all of that, this really is sort of like one of the break shops. We want it to be a really open conversation. The real question we're going to ask today is, what path have you consciously thought of that allows you to do the work we do? And particularly when it's very, very hard, where do you go to get that strength? And so that's the first question we're going to ask all the panelists. At any point, if anyone wants to ask a question or have a comment, just raise your hand and we'll get you a mic. We'll do this first question and then we'll open it up and we'll move on from there. So, Dave, we're going to start with you and then we'll just go down the line. Oh, I'm sorry. You know, this is the problem when I don't have notes. We don't have a script, so you're okay. So actually, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be intentional about being here. Okay, so we're actually going to do an invocation.
Thank you, Mary. And yes, truly, this is a unique opportunity. David, thank you for introducing us to this particular session. And since we represent a variety of faiths and beliefs, it's only appropriate that we recognize those with a brief moment of prayer. That's what brings us together. Dear Father and Creator of us all, we represent different faiths in approaching you, and we seek the strength from that faith to carry out the work that you have called us to do. May we do so with joy, with a spirit of peace, and with your guidance. Amen.
So for this session, we're going to go one at a time and kind of share where we get our strength from to hopefully stimulate some discussion and feedback from you all. So I was raised, wonderful family, hopefully some of you have met them, really strictly Roman Catholic. since I was baptized, in fact. I went to Sunday school, went to church every Sunday, twice on holidays. And then as a teenager, I discovered an organization called Young Life, which some of you may know about, which is a non-denominational Christian organization that basically is like a rock concert and then some prayer breaks out. And when my parish priest learned that I was in Young Life, he told me never to come back to the Catholic Church. That was not his idea of what we were all about or what he was all about. And that was one of those dips in my adolescent graph. And so I didn't really think much about religion or spirituality or any of those things for many, many, many years after that. It really upset me. And then I moved to the mountains. I look out of my window, whether that's in the morning or the office, or if you've been on a Zoom with me, and there's 14,000-foot peaks covered in snow, unfortunately, all the year round. There's woods. Some of you have been on a Zoom with me when a moose walks by and pokes his head in the window just to kind of see what's going on. I spend a fair amount of time standing or paddling in the water. And it is just really hard. It's impossible to not realize there's something bigger than you who is helping you out, who's looking after you, who's taking care of your life when you live in that kind of environment. So that's where I get my strength from.
As most of you know, I'm Charles Bagwell, and a pediatric surgeon in Virginia at the Children's Hospital. And my faith story, I have to tell you, is a somewhat dramatic one. Some of you have heard the story before, and I apologize for telling it, but if I don't, you don't understand why I'm sitting here in front of you now. Because I grew up in a Christian family in a small town, in farming town in Southern Virginia. And I grew up in the church, but I have to say I wasn't what you would call a fervent believer. Raised a family in the Protestant faith, and had been in the hometown of Richmond for quite a few years as an occasional church member, until a single event occurred in the middle of a hot summer night. When I was in hospital, I just reduced an incarcerated hernia and was heading home in the early morning hours when I was called to the trauma bay. I'll never forget it. They brought in a 4-year-old child on a gurney with an EMS person doing CPR. She'd been shot in the left chest. And we had a surgical resident standing there. Her name was Michelle, gowned in gloves. She'd heard the dispatch story. I looked at the child and looked at Michelle and said, "Open her chest." And I joined her, and we spent an hour, and you have all been there, and you know it, you feel it, struggling, trying to resuscitate this child. And you know what it's like. It's a cacophony of noise and people and commotion and blood. And finally, we couldn't get anywhere. It had been an hour, and I did what we have to do, call the code, and you know, the room just gets eerily silent. And I looked at this senior resident. She was only a few months from walking out the door as a graduate from our program. I'd worked with her on her service, and we'd gotten to be good friends, and her eyes looked like a deer in the headlights. And I went over to give her a hug, and she looked up at me. Tears were streaming down her face, and she said to me, "Dr. Bagwell, I'm pregnant." And with that, she turned and she took off her gown and gloves and walked off in the night to see the next patient. And you know, I can still see her face. It bothered me so much. I'd been in practice for 20, 30 years, and as we talked the other day, you get thick-skinned, don't you, of dealing with these things, and you learn to deal with them. But I couldn't. I couldn't sleep, and I remember the next week I talked with the chaplain and told her that story, and she told me, she said, "Well, you should know the residents have so many hours of counseling available to them." And I said, "Well, Nancy, I didn't know that. Who does it?" She said, "I do." "Really? Well, how many of our residents have you talked with?" And she said, "None. I don't know them, and they don't know me, and I don't speak their language. I've never walked in their shoes. And then she stuck her finger at me and said, "They would talk to you, though." And I was, "Oh, my Lord, please, I can't do this. I'm not." But one thing led to another, and I felt called to do something to that effect that led me into seminary. And now, having completed that a few years ago, I serve as an ordained Presbyterian minister in the Presbytery in Central Virginia. And I like to think that the work that I do and we do translates into the greater spiritual realm that we live in and our patients and families live in, and bridging that interface between faith, spirituality, religion, and science are not two separate camps. And I think that's what this meeting is all about, is merging them together so we can use the strength that each of us have in our faith tradition to allow us to be better surgeons and better people for our families and for our patients and, frankly, for each other, too.
Morning. My name is Kurt Heiss. I worked in Atlanta for 30-some years. I am the product of a long line of Lutheran ministers, and my dad stuttered, and he couldn't, so he left the seminary because he didn't think he was going to be a very good preacher, and became a banker. So I grew up in a Lutheran home, a conservative Lutheran home, and I was kind of a naughty kid in high school. Naughty might be kind of that's the G-rated version of, and so I was not an observant person until I went to the seat of all spiritual knowledge, Boulder, Colorado. Where else would you go to have a spiritual reconnection, right? And I began to go to college there and notice the behavior of my colleagues and how it became quite self-destructive. I had been introduced to the missionaries of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as I ended high school. There were 2 LDS kids in my high school class, and they were striking in their behavior, and so I wanted to learn a little bit more about them. And one of them I'd wrestled with, and so he invited me to his family's home, and I was taught a little bit about the gospel. I went away to college, and after a year of thinking about this, I joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A year later, I went as a missionary to Bangkok, Thailand, and I worked there for 2 years. That is the end of the Vietnam War, and so my parents' hair was on fire the day I opened my letter calling me to go to Southeast Asia during a wartime. Why can't they send you to Germany? I'm German-born, and so I had very formative experience that deepened my faith while I was there. So, to cut to the chase a little bit, the things that give me strength are 3. The first one is my Christian faith gives me a sense of mission and purpose. The Savior invited us in the Scriptures to come follow him. And so as I try to do that, or have tried to do that, it helped me understand the heart, mind, and purpose of the Savior's mission. And as I try to imitate those things, in good times, it gives me a deepened understanding. In bad times, it gives me kind of a focus to get up again and get started. And especially when he says, let me share my yoke with me, and that he will help me, which brings the second point. The atonement of Jesus Christ in Christianity brings to us healing when we're wounded and broken. It brings to us, it enables and magnifies us when we're weak and we don't feel adequate to the challenges that we're facing. And it changes our hearts, makes us new men and women. And so that was a huge help. And the last thing was, The Judeo-Christian tradition is that we give thanks to God for things that we've been given. Now, just to build some connection here, you all felt called to be surgeons, especially surgeons for children. You and I, of all people, are most privileged. We have food, clothing, and housing. We're educated. We have a rewarding profession. We have a rewarding community to work in. I could go on, but 99% of the world would kill to have the job that you do. On your good days, it is magnifying it. It elevates you. You are on cloud 9 because you've helped care for wounded children and help them get better. On your bad days, the sense of gratitude pulls me away from that little keyhole that makes me feel defined by my mistake or my error, and reminds me about all the gifts and talents I've been given and how I need to get back in the game and bring those to the other children that will come in to my life that I can help. And so, mission and purpose, the healing power of the atonement of Jesus Christ, and gratitude for all the blessings we've been given.
I just noticed the order we sat down in. I think this is, anyway, we'll come back to that. So my story is I grew up in a Presbyterian home, and I want to acknowledge right now, and the seating has no meaning. I really don't. But we are the dominant religion in the United States, and I do think it's very important that we understand sort of that the religious structures are what has happened through history and is the human effort to try to understand and create a path for a way to see the world that has great history. And these thousands of years old traditions have stood the test of time, and that may be a path that helps anyone. For me, what's happened is through my work as an educator, and particularly watching as a program director, 20 years ago, residents that were really suffering, and then as Dean of Student Affairs, a student that died by suicide, that tremendous suffering, and I was practicing in kind of on and off because the church didn't particularly accept me at that point. So the religious part I was pretty pissed off at for a long time. But what happened in all of that and looking at that suffering of the people around me, I had this pull to understand better both what gives me meaning and how to provide meaning for people that somehow seem to have lost it. And I went back to seminary, most of you know, graduated about 3 years ago, looking for that vocabulary and trying to understand how do you heal the healers? What do we do for each other? And what do I do for myself? Because I was really quite broken as well. Funny thing happened on the way to seminary. First thing that happens, and the first course we had was identity, power, and I can't remember the other one, and I called it it was a required first course in my seminary, and I called it the Rip the White Privilege Band-Aid Off course, okay? And the professor in that course said, let me explain what's going to happen to you over these 3 years. We're going to deconstruct everything you thought you understood about religion and God, and then you're going to have to put it back together. And that's the purpose of this education. And where I ended up with at the end of this is more incredibly connected to everything that connects us. And so I will tell you my current understanding of God, which is not an old white guy on a throne, but my current definition of God is that which creates, sustains, and connects. And so what gives me strength is knowing that that is within me and within everyone. It is the DNA, the atoms, the molecules that were all created in the Big Bang are now all reconstructed as us, but with breath. And that's how we go into our work. And that our job is to realize that there is a veil between this embodied being and that which creates, connects, and sustains. And we just have to recognize that. We have to work at seeing through that veil and staying connected. And that's what gives me strength, is to be connected to the people around me and to that greater creator, sustainer, connector is what gives me strength.
Thank you, Dave, for allowing us this opportunity to speak, and Mary for your leadership, and my fellow panelists. I can say that in the several decades of my career, I've never been asked on an international, national, or local forum to speak on this subject, so thank you for this privilege. I think we all recognize that faith is a very personal journey. So I thought quite a lot about what I was gonna say this morning, and I will tell you that for me, what gives me strength is in one word. It's my religion, Islam. But I wanted to really, with my colleagues in the American Pediatric Surgical Association, frame it in a way that really also shared my beliefs in a moment in a context of a world which is moving towards divisiveness and away from commonality and compassion. So what I wanted to do is just in a moment tell you what Islam means to me, but in that context of commonality, that what is it that Islam has in common with other major faith traditions? Well, I think most of you may or may not know that Islam itself, the word means peace. And which religion in the world doesn't want peace? I would say I, as a follower of Islam, I'm a Muslim. So I'm one who believes that God, of course, I have to submit myself to the will of God. I gain strength from the belief that everything proceeds from God and support and sustenance, exactly as you mentioned, and that majestic scenarios and those mountains you mentioned, Dave, are all from Him. I gain strength from Islam's perception that God is nearly identical in every major religion, and He doesn't need any support. He has no partner. He's the creator, all-powerful. I don't think anyone in a major faith tradition would disagree with that. I gain strength in my knowledge that most every religion believes in angels as the agency by which God communicates with His creatures. And from time to time, revelations from God have been delivered for the guidance of mankind, which many of us revere as holy books over thousands of years, Mary, as you mentioned. I gain strength because I believe God has sent many prophets and holy people to this world, including but not limited to Noah, Abraham, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna. I gain strength from believing personally that the life of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam served as a living example of a life utterly pure and devoted to the service of God and His creation. And that's why we Muslims look to him and his life as a spiritual leader. I gain strength in believing that the resurrection of the soul and the life after death is a major tenet of most of the world's religions. It's a common belief many of us have. I believe that basically we are all should try within ourselves to improve. And this was a theme throughout our professional conference. Self-improvement, self-awareness, curiosity, Dave, as you so beautifully put in your member speak. And that's part of our religion. That's part of who we are and what we believe in. So thanks for just a moment to just share some commonalities.
Thank you. I like to kind of talk about my strength kind of in the context of wellness, since today is the Wellness Day. Dr. Powell kind of put up that nice line graph about how all of us in our lives have our ups and downs, and I haven't shared it with a lot of people. There's a couple of people in this room that I've shared it with, but a few years ago, I actually hit like the nadir. Like I had like a super, ST depression in my professional and personal life. I mean, like all the way down to the x-axis. And I mean, I'd go to sleep crying. I would wake up in the middle of the night crying. I mean, this was ugly crying. And my colleagues and my friends and my husband, nobody like knew how to help me. And when I would wake up, I would go and I prayed. And the person that I could connect to was God. And during that really difficult time in my life, I learned that one of my cohorts for my fellowship had taken his life. And I knew I was in a bad place, but I didn't know how bad until I realized that I empathized with what he had done. I mean, I understood it. Like, I could see the attractiveness of taking that step to alleviate the hurt and the struggle and the inability to catch your breath for a moment. And he and I had been really good friends because, this was back when you personally interviewed in person, and so we took a lot of time traveling together. And I remember, and some of the people in this room might remember, I had driven everybody to the airport in Phoenix, and I was dropping him off, and he finally felt comfortable enough to ask me. And he said, I have to ask you, you're a woman of science. We're all people of science. And yet you wear that thing on your head. How do you make that jive? Like, what is the role of God in the lives of people of science? And as I mourned him and mourned where my life was, I could not help but wish he had something like that anchor that I had at 2 o'clock in the morning when I would wake up ugly crying and would sit on my prayer mat and talk to Allah and ask him to show me why I was in this place and why, through all the struggles, I was continuing to, and how to navigate my way out. And so I get my faith from a similar place that a lot of people do. I just happen to call it Islam. And is a very integral part of who I am, what drives me, what causes me to come to work every day, what caused me to choose to become a pediatric surgeon, to endure the struggles that every one of us had to endure to walk this path and become the people that we are. And I'm really grateful for this group here, for the leadership here, who's given us a permission structure to actually talk about this topic, because if we're really going to be our authentic selves, if we're going to be our best selves, if we're going to be able to be present at this really important, really difficult work that we do, this is a part of us we can't continue to ignore.
Oh, well, that's a tough act to follow. My name is Sam Sofer. I'm a pediatric surgeon in New York at Cohen Children's Medical Center. And I grew up in a modern Orthodox Jewish home, which I still maintain with my own family. And I think what gives me strength, particularly from my religion, is the sense of community that involves. And I think to all the different things that involved in our community. I think back to when I was a first-year attending. I just graduated. It's almost 20 years ago now. And I was caring for a 16-year-old girl who we put on ECMO. She had been studying in a seminary in Israel, as many of our kids do in our community. In fact, my son is there now, studying in that. And she came back home, and she was very sick with a, and we put her on ECMO. And I remember that this was a really big deal in at least in my area, in the South Shore of Long Island. And literally thousands of folks would gather in synagogues and pray for her. And they would say Psalms. And when they said Psalms, I could almost swear she would rally. And this happened repeatedly over a number of days. She, of course, came. She was the only girl from a family of, I think there were 4 boys, and she was the only girl. It was a tragic, tragic thing, and ultimately the decision was made to let her go. But I remember that from the time, what I learned is when they were praying for her, it was just an amazing thing. And it taught me that the power of prayer is amazing. And I personally don't think I pray that well. It's not one of the things that for me personally, it's never been something that I do. But I do believe that when the community gets together and asks for this kind of help, it's really quite amazing. There's a saying, at least in Judaism, that the surgeons, we act as messengers. It's called shaliach. We act as people that are trying to help God. I think we have a very, very solemn responsibility. We have a job that really almost no one else has in our world. And to me, I act as a messenger. I do the best I can to help kids and to get kids better, but I'm doing it in the context of religion and a creator who cares about everybody and is hopefully helping me out. So that's how I find strength, and I'll hand it back to Mary.
So I'm going to be aware of the time because we have 13 minutes. We were going to talk, why don't we just briefly go down and maybe each talk about a practice or one or two important practices that get us back to that space, that help us see through that veil that's separating us from that which is greater than us. And
so twice a day, I meditate. It's just that simple. You just kind of, maybe it's not that simple as I think about it. You separate yourself from whatever the stresses are of the day, but you connect yourself to whatever is where you find your strength. And I'm very fortunate. I live in a place where, as I say, you can't deny the strength that's around you. So I meditate a couple times a day.
I think I find my strength in practices all day long in the work that I do. I really, aside from prayer, meditation, thoughtfulness, all those things, I think our work itself is a prayer. I use the time at the scrub sink to pray for every child, the big cases, the little cases, or whatever. And I can't tell you in an ordinary day how many times things will come up and families will say something to me unexpectedly. It happens to all of you. I'd love to hear from you. That reinforces the fact that we are all connected. They give to us greater power than we deserve because of what we do. And that in itself can be a blessing or a curse, but we have to recognize it for what it is. And I think use it to connect to those families for all of us, them as well as us.
I'm learning quite a bit from my colleagues here. This is not going to be very exciting. Every day when I get up, I read the scriptures for a while and pray and consider the time I have that day to be a stewardship, much like the parable of the talents. I'm going to be responsible for what I do this day at some point as I rehearse the course of my life with my Maker. And when I retired 3 years ago, I became a missionary, a senior missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I work part-time in the Atlanta, Georgia Temple, and the rest of the time I thought I would be a frontline missionary working in a food kitchen or something like that, but I was asked to support or coordinate the missionary work for the church in Georgia and South Carolina for the first couple years of my retirement, and I work with my wife as my mission companion, and we call seniors from congregations to serve in humanitarian functions in their community. It gives these talented people a sense of mission and purpose as they reach outside themselves and serve other people who are in need. And so that's what we've done for the last 3 years. So to summarize, each day I get the chance to stop worrying about my first world problems and invest in helping organize people reach out and help folks who don't have the things that you and I do.
I think another commonality in all faith traditions and everyone who seeks to stand on holy ground, however you define that, is that to have those moments of mindfulness. And what I mean by that, when you can turn off the inner chatter, and particularly the negative inner chatter. And so I seek a lot of practices that will simply get me in the moment, because I believe that's where the divine resides. And that's often in silence. It's in prayer. It's an intentional connection, which is what prayer is. And so I have a morning practice actually with a group of a Christian meditation called Centering Prayer. I also, throughout the day, though, try to remember, right? To simply stop and say, I'm here. And I think that's a very powerful practice. And then the last one is one of my favorite theologians, Sarah Bessey, in her new book, which was Field Notes from the Wilderness, which, if you're an ex-evangelical or have struggled at all with religion, it's a fabulous book. But she quoted another friend of hers who said, you just got to bless the crap out of everything.
Thank you. I'm going to answer this question using the words of a mentor, and I've actually posted a 5-minute clip on the chat in case anyone wants to hear it. It's an oral essay that was recorded by CBS for one of their radio programs, and I'll just quote just a part of it, where he says, "My life is guided by this faith and by the following rules. Whenever I feel lonely, weary, or discouraged, I must turn towards God for companionship, comfort, and help. He is ever near and will not fail me. I must make my heart his shrine and temple, and let him ever dwell in it in sweet guardianship and companionship. I must stand up for truth, righteousness, fair dealing, and justice. I must stand with God, though I may have to stand against the whole world."
There is a concept in Islam which is very trendy right now. We call it intentionality. In Islam, it's your niyyah, or the intention with which you get up in the morning, the intention with which you sit on the stage, the intention with which you hold the scalpel. And a practice in Islam is we pray 5 times a day at minimum. And those times are set during the day. And what that causes you to do is to pause. You are forced, if you want to practice this faith, to pause, step away from everything, have a conversation with God, and reset that intention, reset your niyyah. And so when all that negative noise comes around and all those things are kind of getting in your way and making you lose sight, you step back. And, at most hospitals, I'm walking into a stairwell to take this moment. But you still take that moment, reset your intention, recognize why you're here, and be grateful for that opportunity, and then go back into it.
For me, this was the easiest of the questions, because what rejuvenates me every week is the Sabbath. And it's an interesting thing in Orthodoxy, because it seems like a very restrictive day. You can't turn lights on and off. You can't watch television. Can't use a cell phone. There's a lot of can'ts that you can't do on the Sabbath. But what you can do is you can sit for a couple of meals with your entire family. The kids never even think of taking out a phone. It's unheard of for 24 hours. You can play board games. You can read a book. You can discuss what's really going on in your life. It's the most freeing and rejuvenating day, and it never grows old. Never grows old. I joke around with folks that everyone should have a day like this. And as we get more and more modern, as there's more and more distractions, it gets even better. And that's how special. There's an aura to the day. There's something unique when the sundown happens Friday night. And it's really something that I think a lot of folks of all faiths would experience and would really benefit from.
All right. What comments and questions do you have for us or each other, or encouragements, concerns? And Eric, can I ask you, because do we have a second mic? Oh, would you mind being the mic passer of? So, and I do want to comment, and to everyone who's watching this at home, we know that you are with us. We, there's another great part of, I think, all great faith traditions is that time has a very different kind of meaning, and so we consider you present with us now, even if you're watching this later. And Eric, you feel free to start the conversation. That's
Is this working? Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you so much to the panel. And obviously, we bring our full selves to work every day. That's what we aspire to do. But some people may be timid to bring this aspect and to actually articulate it in our, we don't want to overbring our politics. We might not want to overbring our religion, but this is who we are. Have anybody on the panel have any negative experiences when you've brought this aspect to your practice and your care?
I'll start, but then certainly what. I try to bring it every moment, all the time. I don't discuss it, right? And I think we don't, and at least certainly in my faith tradition, it's the walking the walk that's more important than the talking the talk. And so my first response to that is I do not have any bad stories about bringing it to work, because it is my work.
So Terry, I would say that I don't want to whitewash this, but I would say that I live in the Southeast, and which is kind of characteristic of a faith group of people, a very diverse Christian faith mostly. And I think that on the other hand, when tragedies occur in the hospital, and I'm sitting in the family room with people, I ask the question, are you praying people? Are you people that have a faith tradition? If they are, I invite them to connect with that. And many times they're so emotionally destroyed they can't do it. So I offer to pray with them, and that's been very influential for other members of the medical staff, mostly ICU people who were with me at those times. It was healing for the family, but also somehow it changed the practice a little bit of the people that I was working with.
Terry, in response to your question, not negative, but somewhat sort of from skepticism. An associate I worked with some time ago told me a story. He's somewhat of an agnostic, and he was meeting with a family of a child he was going to operate on for a very difficult operation that he didn't think was going to go well. And the family surprisingly asked him to join them in prayer. Of course, he went along with it, and he said to his surprise, the operation was magnificent. He said everything was just like it should be. And he said, I've never seen anything like it. And as soon as he came out, he called me, because when I went to seminary, my faculty were sort of astounded that God would call me, of all people, to do this. And they agreed to help me during that seminary training and take me off call. So they knew about my interest in that. And he called me up and he said, look, maybe there's something to this after all. And I think people do recognize that, whatever your faith may be, that it draws them into want to be a part of it. I'm sure you have similar stories.
I think we're actually out of time. But we want to sort of end with intention like we began. So I just, everybody kind of be present again in this room together in this community. And we hope that this has helped everyone be able to think about and share something that is so important to all of us and that is hard to share. We're going to leave with a blessing, but I want to make sure you're sitting next to someone. So if you're not sitting next to someone, make sure you are. Eric, or threesomes. So look around you and make sure, okay? How many of you are familiar with the Buddhist, the metta practice, the meditation of loving kindness? I see a few heads nodding. So this has actually been a practice of mine that has really helped. And so the concept here, it's a practice of compassion, that you start with yourself. Generally, you move to someone you love dearly. Then you move to people you know. Then you move to your country, then the world, to all people, and then to all sentient beings. And there's a series of phrases that, there's all kinds of variations. The one that I used, and I used to do this driving into work, may I be happy, healthy, safe, and at peace. And then I'd say it for my wife, I'd say it for my trainees, I'd say it for my patients, everyone in the hospital, everyone in my city, everyone in the world, and I'd get to work. And so what I want us to do is bless each other today doing this. So I want each of you with intention to say after me, may I be happy, healthy, safe, and at peace. May I be happy, healthy, safe, and at peace. And I want you to turn to the person or the threesome around you, and each of you say this to each other. May you be happy, healthy, safe, and at peace. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us. We really appreciate you all being here.